Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Devin. This is video number 5. In these videos, I've been giving you a summary of the chapters in the book Getting Married and Staying That Way, which is available on Amazon.com. I would encourage you to go back and look at the previous videos so that you can get an idea of the previous chapters that I've discussed. This video starts with chapter number 8, and chapter number 8 covers the concept of for better and for worse. So chapter 8 goes into taking the good with the bad, and it gives you advice on how to deal with the bad. It's great to have good times in a relationship. It's expected to have times when you're not going to get along or you're going to disagree. And this book gives you advice on how to deal with that. Also, in chapter 8, we go over adjusting to shared decision making. When you're single, you make all the decisions. You might get advice from other people, but ultimately, the final decision is up to you. Well, in a marriage, you have to learn how to share decision making. That means having discussions with your spouse before you make major decisions, deciding between the two of you what is considered a major decision, that sort of thing. And just realizing that in making decisions for your household, for your family, that you have to take your spouse's opinion into consideration. So chapter 8 goes into that and gives advice about that as well. Also in chapter 8, it goes over balancing give and take. In any kind of relationship, whether it's a marriage or a friendship or a relationship with your family members, there's going to be give and take. Chapter 8 goes into that and talks about that. And it's interesting because I'll give you an example of what I mean by give and take. Some people are more takers than givers. They'll take and take and take. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Some people aren't even aware that they're mostly takers and not so much givers. They're used to having things their way, in other relationships maybe, or just in life before you. So just making you aware of the importance of give and take in a relationship, and just giving you, putting you in the mindset of evaluating how that's working for you in your relationship. And there are some examples that the book gives and some really good advice about that as well. Also, when we're talking about balancing of give and take, characteristics of love through balance of give and take. There's one in particular that comes to mind, and that's doing things for the other person's benefit without expecting anything in return. Some people have that down packed. That's just who they are. They just do it without thinking about it. Other people don't even know that concept exists, and that's okay. But this book, it basically just, it puts it on your mind. It lets you know that that's a thing, doing things for the benefit of others and not expecting anything in return. So chapter 8 also talks about that. Also in a marriage or any relationship, we have different strengths and weaknesses. We're all individuals. We have strengths, and we each have our own weaknesses. Maybe you might be weak in one area and your spouse is strong in that area. That's a good thing. I'll give you an example. Like maybe your spouse is better at disciplining the children and you're not. That doesn't mean that they're better than you. It just means that that's their strength. And that's a good thing, to focus on the other person's strengths and your strengths as well, and helping each other with your weaknesses, encouraging each other, cheering each other on, and just being there for each other to get through the situations where you find yourself to be weaker in. So chapter 8 goes into that as well. Um, Also, one thing that I wanted to mention, prayer, I talked about this in the previous chapters briefly. Prayer is important in a relationship. I believe that it helps your relationship because God knows you better than you know yourself, and He knows your spouse. He knows your spouse better than they know themselves. So, why not communicate with the person who can read minds and who knows the both of you better than either one of you could ever know each other? So that's why I think that prayer is important in a relationship. One of the reasons, anyway. So, one thing though to keep in mind with prayer doesn't necessarily stop someone or it doesn't necessarily keep someone from behaving a certain way. The thing about prayer is that when you're praying for someone or you're trying to understand your spouse, and you're praying to ask God to give you a better understanding of your spouse or of yourself, why you respond the way you do or whatever your reason for your praying during and about your relationship. Um, Prayer doesn't necessarily keep a person from doing something, but it can decrease their temptation and strengthen their resolve. So that's another reason why prayer is important, in my opinion. Also, chapter 8 it talks about not judging your spouse. Especially if they're trying to do their best. I talked earlier about weaknesses and, maybe they're working on some area that they're weak in. If they're doing their best, but they're still not where you would like for them to be, just not judging them, but instead encouraging them and helping them and giving them what they need in order to succeed with that goal of improving. So chapter 8 talks about that. It also talks about the past. If something has happened in the past, more than likely it's going to come up in the present. And if it's something that's not going to matter tomorrow, then just let it go. Let it go. Dwelling on negative things is never good for any relationship. Dwelling on the past, it's detrimental to any relationship. If it's something that you would consider to be a deal breaker, then discuss that, with your spouse and talk about it. That's the best thing that you can do in that situation, in my opinion. One thing about love, I feel like love diminishes when you focus on the negative, but love flourishes when you focus on the positive. So just keep that in mind. Chapter 9 goes into outside influences. What are outside influences? Well, that would be like your family members, your friends, your job, anything that's outside of your relationship is considered an outside influence. When you're discussing your spouse with your family members, it is always a good idea to focus on the positive. Discussing negative things about your spouse, talking down, or talking badly about your spouse to other people, I don't think that's ever a good idea, because what ends up happening is you and your spouse have an argument, for example, and you're upset about something that they've done. You discuss it with your sister or somebody in your family or one of your friends, and then you and your spouse end up making up. You're fine now. Well, your friend or whoever you spoke to, they're still upset about it. So now this person is upset, you've moved on, and they have not. So then you have to deal with that. So just to avoid that whole issue, I believe it's best to just not speak negatively of your spouse to other people. If you have an issue with your spouse, talk to your spouse about it. So chapter 9 goes into that, dealing with those types of situations. And another thing that chapter 9 goes into is discussing the role that in-laws would play. For example, what do you do if one of your in-laws wants to come and stay with you for an extended period of time? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about your spouse's family members coming to stay with you for an extended period of time? You guys should discuss that and kind of have an idea of how you each feel about that. And that's just one example of dealing with your in-laws that is discussed in Chapter 9. Managing your conflict. In dealing with outside influences. So, for example, if I have an issue with my spouse's brother, like he's offended me in some way, what I would do is I would let my spouse know, and then I would allow my spouse to speak to his brother about the situation. Or even if it's the other way around, if my spouse's brother feels like I offended him or I did something that he didn't like, then it would be better for him to discuss that with my husband and then for my husband to discuss it with me. And the reason why I say that is because my spouse knows his brother better than I do. So I might misunderstand some type of body language that his brother is giving me or his brother's tone of voice. I might misunderstand that, and then the situation just gets out of hand and escalates in a negative way. Whereas my spouse, he knows his brother and he can talk to his brother and he understands him better and he can come to a better conclusion about what's going on and then let me know so that I understand maybe there was a misunderstanding or whatever the case may be. So Chapter 9 goes into managing conflict when dealing with these outside influences, and that's an example of that. Another outside influence are finances. Yes. Discussing your finances, being aware of each other's debts, that sort of thing. You know, you're together, you're a team, you're supposed to be having each other's backs and working together in this relationship. So knowing these things and being aware of these things, coming together and discussing these things is very important for your relationship. And Chapter 9 also goes into another outside influence, which is infidelity. So it touches on that a little bit, gives some advice about that as well in Chapter 9. So Chapter 10 discusses giving praise and showing appreciation. Giving credit where it's due. You know, if somebody did something and they deserve the credit for that, then give them the credit. That's a great thing. Praise them for the things that they do, you know, that are great. It's always a good thing. Explaining to your spouse why you appreciate the things that they do is also a great habit. Even if it's something that you expected them to do anyway, giving that person praise and letting them know that you appreciate their efforts because they didn't have to do that, you know. An example would be like, you know, maybe I had 5 things that I needed to do and I'm already swamped, or maybe I'm behind, and my husband will come and he'll do the dishes, which was one of the things on my list, and without me even asking him to, which is great. So I would show him and let him know that I appreciate that because I really appreciate that, you know. I really think it's important because nobody likes to feel unappreciated. So, you know, I don't like to feel unappreciated myself. So, you know, let me know that if I did that and you appreciated it, let me know. So then I'll know, oh, well, I need to do that then. You know, they appreciate that. You know, sometimes people will do things and it's things that they like, but not necessarily something that you like. So, you know, just letting them know when you appreciate things, even in that case too, you know, because still they didn't have to do it. Really, Chapter 10, I think that one of the main concepts in that chapter is not taking your spouse for granted. You know, just treating each other like it's a privilege to be married to them. So that's chapter 10. It's a great chapter. Chapter 11 talks about incorporating the fruits of the Spirit into your relationship. Very important, in my opinion. What are the fruits of the Spirit? Well, in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23, it lists the fruits of the Spirit, which are, let's see if I can remember, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, goodness, gentleness, meekness, patience, and faith. Yes. So chapter 11 goes into what each one of those means specifically. And it gives you advice about that. And just incorporating these fruits into your relationship, it would just, it benefit your relationship greatly. Not just your marriage, but really any relationship that you're in. Those are really good things to focus on and to improve upon in any relationship. The fruits of the Spirit. So this book really goes into how effective communication is a major contributor to the success of your relationship. Prayer helps to maintain a positive outlook even when you're going through things. So communicating, praying, these are good things for your relationship, good things to value and to spend time doing. The goal really, I think, is not to try to get your spouse to do what you want them to do, but instead to release them to God so that they can do what God wants them to do. It's kind of deep, I know. But that really should be the goal. Because again, God knows what's best for you in your relationship, and God knows you better than you know yourself, as well as them better. So it's not about getting your spouse to do what you want, but getting them to do what God would have them to do. And that would greatly benefit your relationship because God has your best interest in mind. I truly believe that. If you and your spouse allow yourselves to be led by God, then your relationship will flourish. So I encourage you to allow yourselves to be led by God, which will help your relationship, to flourish. So if you have any questions, just leave them below. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments, also leave them below. Once again, the name of the book is called Getting Married and Staying That Way, and it can be found on Amazon.com. Check out my Instagram at Devin B. Jones. You can also check out my blog, which is at devinspov.com. That's DEVENSPOV.com. And I'm going to leave that information in the details section as well. Thank you so much for your time. And I just pray that everything works out for you with your relationship, everything goes well for you, and that you would just continue to grow with your spouse. Continue to grow, continue to learn, and I just pray that everything works out in your relationship. Thank you so much and have a great day.